The evening settled over our Chicago suburb with a quietness that felt heavier than usual. I moved through the kitchen and dining room, adjusting the small, carefully folded napkins into their leaf shapes, each a tiny symbol of care I had placed there, hoping someone might notice. The table was set with my favorite dishes, candles ready to cast a soft glow, yet I could feel the familiar tension under the surface, the unspoken rules that governed how attention was parceled out in our family. Callista, my sister, flitted through the rooms, laughing at jokes that never seemed meant for me. I forced a smile, my fingers lingering on the stem of a wine glass as I imagined the subtle tilt of her gaze, the way she knew how to command the room without raising her voice. By the time our extended family started drifting into the dining room, I had already anticipated the familiar pattern. Conversations bloomed around me but never with me. Remarks were thrown casually, coated in humor, that left me teetering between invisibility and irritation. I kept my voice measured, laughed lightly when prompted, and stored mental notes, mapping out interactions as if I were cataloging behaviors for a later strategy. There was a certain satisfaction in understanding the recurring motifs, the small rituals that reinforced the hierarchy I was always on the outskirts of. As Uncle Tom recounted his latest golfing triumph, I caught myself recalling a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt about the strength of quiet persistence. A faint smile played on my lips. If history taught me anything, patience could be sharper than anger. Then it happened, the first, undeniable brush of neglect. The room quieted for toast, glasses lifted, and not a single eye met mine. My gift sat untouched, my seat across the table conspicuously empty of acknowledgement. I felt the familiar sting, but instead of reacting outwardly, I studied. I noticed how the candlelight caught the curve of Callista's hair, the careful arrangement of plates that excluded me. Inside, a fire simmered, not of rash anger, but of keen observation, each overlooked gesture fueling the slow build of the plan. I reminded myself of the folded napkin at my place, its leaf shape a small anchor, a symbol of care that I had given without expectation. This silent demonstration of familial neglect was more than a slight, it was a pattern I had learned to read and, eventually, to counter. The tension shifted abruptly later that night when I discovered the eviction notice slipped between a stack of old correspondence on the hall table. My breath caught as I read the vague demand to vacate part of the property I had always considered mine. Shock and indignation surged through me, an immediate pang of helplessness tempered by a simmering clarity. This wasn't new, life had handed me similar exclusions before, disguised in smiles and polite conversation, but this was concrete, formal, undeniable. I folded the paper carefully, placing it next to the leaf-shaped napkin, my mind already whirring, documents together, potential allies to consider, the family dynamics mapped in precise, silent calculations. Even in the panic, a strategic thought took root: they had underestimated me, as always, and that would be their first mistake. I walked back through the quiet house, past the rooms that hummed with distant laughter and muted television, and I let my mind wander through every prior instance where I had been overlooked. I recalled birthdays unacknowledged, subtle comments that dismissed my opinions, and the way Callista could twist concern into dominance without effort. Yet, there was also a sense of preparation in these memories, a growing reservoir of experience I could draw upon. I arranged my notes, made mental checklists, and rehearsed scenarios, all while keeping my face calm, composed. There was no need for immediate confrontation. Patience, as always, offered a sharper edge than impulse. By the time I retired to my room, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system, I had tucked the eviction notice away with care, alongside the folded napkin that now felt heavier than ever. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small leaf in my hands, feeling the weight of the silence that had greeted me throughout the evening. My internal monologue ran quietly but firmly: I won't let this go unnoticed someday, they'll have to see me. The hurt lingered, but beneath it, a new sense of determination took hold, steady and deliberate. The night stretched ahead, full of unspoken possibilities and calculated patience, and I knew that the quiet of this birthday would not be the end, but the beginning. I sat at my desk, the eviction notice from last night still folded neatly beside the leaf-shaped napkin I had kept as a small reminder of the birthday I had endured. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the papers I was reviewing, and I let my mind wander over Callista's subtle maneuvers. I didn't replay the dinner events, instead, I examined her behavior with the same precision I would use to analyze a chessboard. Who in the family would align with her? Who might tip the scales in my favor? My pen hovered over a notebook as I mapped out connections and possibilities, observing patterns that had become familiar over years of careful attention. Each detail felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, one I intended to solve without losing my composure or revealing my strategic intent too soon. The day shifted quietly when I received a message through one of the family intermediaries, a friend who occasionally acted as a messenger between Callista and the rest of us. The words were innocuous at first glance, but the implication was clear: mind your place. I felt a prick of irritation, tempered immediately by the awareness that reacting impulsively would only give Callista leverage. I documented the message meticulously, noting the time, the tone, and the sender, as though I were building a case in advance. Humor helped me breathe through the frustration. Teddy Roosevelt's words echoed in my mind: speak softly and carry a big stick. I smiled at the thought. Calm observation had always been my weapon, and patience, my shield. Later, a folded note slipped between pages of a family letter caught my attention. The handwriting was careful, almost polite, yet the meaning was unmistakable. I read it several times, deciphering the subtle warning it contained. It implied I was overstepping boundaries, an attempt to manipulate me through suggestion rather than confrontation. Instead of igniting anger, it sparked calculated reflection. I considered possible legal remedies and strategic moves, mentally assembling a framework that could withstand scrutiny. I noted the emotional undertone, recognizing the attempt at psychological influence, and allowed myself a quiet sense of empowerment. I would not be rattled, I would act with deliberate intelligence, letting foresight guide my next steps. I spent the remainder of the afternoon aligning notes and observations, reaching out discreetly to family friends whose counsel I trusted, careful not to reveal the depth of my concerns to anyone likely to report back to Callista. Each pattern I documented became a tool for understanding the wider network of influence within the family. I considered past instances where subtle exclusions had been my reality, using them to inform strategies for the present, without dwelling on the pain they caused. Motivational thoughts ran through my mind, practical and focused: you never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. Each decision was measured, each potential move calculated, and yet the simmering determination beneath the surface grew steadily. By late afternoon, as shadows stretched across my office floor, I noticed a subtle discrepancy in one of the family documents I had recently received. It was minor, almost imperceptible, but the significance was unmistakable to me. My mind raced, connecting the dots between this hint and Callista's previous messages. A sense of cautious anticipation took hold. This was my opportunity, a chance to act strategically without exposing my intentions prematurely. I allowed a slow, deliberate breath to fill my lungs, feeling the quiet satisfaction of plans forming beneath the calm exterior. The next steps would require patience and precision, but I was ready. The quiet confrontation had begun, and I would navigate it with intelligence, resilience, and the subtle power of controlled observation. I settled into the worn leather chair by the window, the late afternoon sunlight stretching across my living room, warming the quiet air with its golden hue. My coffee sat beside me, steam curling lazily, as I opened my notebook to trace the patterns I had been noticing over the past few weeks. Callista's behavior had always been layered with subtlety, but now I could see the threads connecting one slight exclusion to another, one sly comment to the next. Each instance of dismissal or manipulation revealed itself like a faint mark on a blueprint, and I traced them carefully, noting inconsistencies in family communications that might otherwise be overlooked. This wasn't about anger, it was about understanding the architecture of control and preparing my mind for what needed to come. A small ritual, folding a new leaf-shaped napkin and sipping the coffee in quiet contemplation, anchored me, letting the tension settle just enough to focus my thoughts clearly. Later that afternoon, I lingered at the family friend's cafe, ostensibly to catch a break, but my attention was elsewhere. I overheard a conversation, one that had not been meant for me, between Callista and another relative. Their words were quiet, almost measured, but the meaning cut sharp. They were planning to undermine me, to shift property boundaries and influence decisions that had long been assumed secure. I felt a rush of indignation, quickly tempered by strategic patience. This was not the moment to confront. Instead, I mapped out their alliances in my mind, noting potential points of leverage, weighing each connection carefully. My hands tightened slightly around my coffee cup, not from fear, but from the sharp clarity that came with understanding the stakes. Each sentence I overheard added a piece to the puzzle, highlighting my need for discretion and intelligence in response. Returning home, I sifted through a stack of family correspondence and discovered the evidence of a secret arrangement, documents hinting at Callista's influence over decisions that directly affected my property and rights. The realization sent a brief shiver through me, a mix of disbelief and controlled frustration. I photographed the relevant pages, meticulously noted the dates, and began a discreet plan of action, mentally plotting how to gather further proof without alerting anyone. Every thought was precise, every action measured. This wasn't merely reacting, it was calculating the next strategic move while keeping my composure intact. I felt the balance between anger and intelligence settle into a deliberate calm, a readiness to act when the moment was right. The evening deepened as I reviewed my notes and evidence, reflecting on past experiences that had taught me resilience and caution. A trusted family friend offered guidance in hushed tones over coffee, discussing general strategies without revealing specifics. I absorbed every word, blending their wisdom with my own insights, mentally rehearsing the steps I would take. Motivational thoughts ran through my mind. The best revenge is living well and being prepared, reminding me that patience and planning were as powerful as any confrontation. Even in solitude, I felt a growing empowerment, a quiet readiness to counter the manipulations that had gone on for far too long. As dusk fell and the shadows in the living room lengthened, I sensed that my careful observations had not gone unnoticed. There was a subtle shift in the correspondence arriving that day, a warning so faint it could have been dismissed. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing slightly, a faint, private smile crossing my face. They thought they were moving in secret, but I was aware. Every step I had taken, every note I had made, every insight I had gathered, all of it had prepared me. They did not know that I was ready to act quietly, strategically, and with precision. The hidden strings were visible to me now, and I understood the power of foresight in a family accustomed to underestimating me. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across my study desk, illuminating the neatly stacked folders and the laptop that hummed quietly, a constant companion in my silent planning. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle the knots of tension in my shoulders, while my mind replayed the subtle signals I had gathered over the past weeks. Callista's indirect manipulations, the veiled warnings, the secret arrangements, they all traced a pattern I could no longer ignore. I reviewed each interaction carefully, imagining the intentions behind every word, every email, every slight gesture, and for the first time, I began to see the lines drawn clearly. These weren't just casual family disputes, they were deliberate moves in a game I had been forced to play without rules. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, grounding my thoughts, preparing for the confrontation I knew was inevitable, while keeping my voice calm in the quiet of the morning. An unexpected ping from my inbox pulled my attention sharply. There it was, an email from Callista, the words carefully measured, hinting at overstepping boundaries, implying consequences without ever naming them. I leaned back, reading and rereading, deciphering the tone, the hidden meaning behind the seemingly innocuous sentences. My pulse quickened not from fear, but from a keen awareness of the challenge laid before me. I composed a response mentally, balancing firmness with diplomacy, carefully choosing phrasing that would assert my stance without giving away my strategy. A quote from Roosevelt drifted into my mind, "The pen is mightier than the sword." It felt appropriate, a reminder that careful thought and deliberate words often wielded more power than hasty confrontation. Every line I drafted in my head reinforced the control I intended to maintain over this slowly unfolding chessboard. Later, while reviewing family documents, I uncovered a hidden file, digital correspondence revealing additional measures Callista had taken to manipulate outcomes in her favor. Disbelief flared briefly, then settled into controlled determination. I photographed the key pages, organized the information, and traced the sequence of actions with methodical care. There was no room for rash decisions, every step required thought, precision, and patience. I reflected on my previous experiences, on how often I had been overlooked and underestimated, and felt a quiet, simmering empowerment. The situation demanded strategy, not emotion, and I was determined to remain composed while plotting each calculated move. The stakes were higher than ever, and every choice mattered. By mid-morning, I reached out discreetly to a trusted friend, a quiet confidant who understood both the dynamics of my family and the importance of discretion. We spoke in hushed tones, weighing legal options, social leverage, and personal boundaries, while I kept the specifics of Callista's maneuvers close to my chest. I considered each possible action carefully, evaluating risks, timing, and potential outcomes. My inner dialogue focused on maintaining moral high ground, clever maneuvering, and the long view. Lessons learned from past encounters guided me, patience, observation, and strategic restraint were my allies. I reminded myself repeatedly that control was not about asserting dominance immediately, but about positioning oneself advantageously to act decisively when the time came. As the morning waned, I noticed subtle shifts in communication patterns, slight hesitations in emails, nuanced phrasing, and changes in tone that suggested Callista might sense my growing awareness. I allowed a small, private smile, feeling the quiet power of anticipation. They assumed control, unaware that I had quietly begun to draw my own lines in the sand. Every observation, every note, every careful calculation had prepared me to respond not with rash emotion, but with strategic intelligence. I could feel the tension, the unspoken acknowledgement that the game was changing. My thoughts settled on the next moves, deliberate and measured, confident that the board was finally mine to play. The morning passed in focused determination, the sunlight slowly fading, and I knew the confrontation would come, but on my terms, guided by patience, intelligence, and resolve. The afternoon sun slanted across my office, illuminating the stacks of files and the open laptop that had become my constant companion. I ran through the week's events in my mind, reviewing subtle signs and reminders that Callista's influence extended further than I had initially feared. Every passing glance, every casually dropped remark from co-workers seemed to carry an undercurrent of manipulation, a quiet orchestration aimed at undermining my authority. I carefully noted each instance, compiling a mental ledger of potential threats, and considered how to maintain composure while collecting evidence. The stakes were rising, and though the tension in my chest grew, I reminded myself that measured observation, rather than reaction, was the most powerful tool I possessed. Patience and strategy had carried me this far, and they would carry me further. By mid-afternoon, murmurs reached my ears, colleagues subtly twisting my contributions, presenting my work in ways that suggested I was not fully capable. Anger flickered, quick and sharp, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I documented each misrepresentation meticulously, mentally drafting professional clarifications that would assert the truth without escalating conflict. I reminded myself of an old saying I had often relied upon: keep your friends close, your enemies closer. It was a guiding principle, a way to navigate the minefield without losing control. Every action I took, every note I made, was a step toward reclaiming authority quietly yet decisively. The situation worsened when a co-worker I had trusted openly sided with Callista, revealing a deeper level of betrayal. Disappointment washed over me briefly, but it quickly gave way to measured resolve. I mapped alliances carefully, identifying colleagues whose counsel I could rely on, mentors whose perspective could strengthen my approach. Each conversation was deliberate, each action weighed against potential outcomes. I reminded myself that intelligence and foresight were my allies. Impulsive retaliation would only compromise the strategic advantage I had been cultivating. The sense of violation simmered beneath the surface, fueling determination rather than fear. With the pieces aligned, I began plotting countermeasures. Publicly, I would maintain professionalism, assert my role and contributions through clear, calm communication, and avoid giving Callista the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Behind the scenes, I fortified my network, ensuring that evidence, support, and strategy were in place before any decisive move. I considered each possible step, timing, audience, risks, and benefits, carefully balancing the tactical with the moral. Patience remained paramount, yet with each calculated decision, my confidence swelled. This was no longer merely a defensive posture, I was positioning to reclaim influence methodically. As the afternoon deepened, subtle shifts in communication hinted that Callista might be sensing my growing awareness. A faint hesitation in an email, a carefully worded message, all suggested the game was changing. I allowed a small, quiet smile, acknowledging that the pieces were falling into place. They assumed control, yet they were unaware of the careful, deliberate planning unfolding beneath the surface. Every observation, every recorded misstep, every quiet strategic conversation strengthened my position. The tension in the office felt palpable, yet I remained calm, empowered, ready to move with precision when the time came. Every step mattered now, every detail counted, and I knew the path forward would require vigilance, intelligence, and the quiet, unwavering resolve I had honed over years of careful observation. The house was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost deliberate. I moved through the living room, glancing at framed family photos, each smile frozen in time, a reminder of the favoritism I had long sensed but rarely confronted. Patterns from the past weeks coalesced in my mind, subtle dismissals, veiled remarks, careful positioning, and I knew that the escalation I had been preparing for was imminent. My chest tightened slightly, not with fear, but with the awareness that this confrontation demanded both patience and precision. Every word, every expression would need to be measured. I steadied myself, mentally rehearsing responses, anticipating counter-arguments, and evaluating the emotional temperature of the room before any engagement. Callista's presence in the hallway signaled that the moment had arrived. I faced her, keeping my posture calm, yet alert, letting the weight of quiet confidence set over me. "I think it's time we address some of the recent choices," I began, my voice controlled but firm. She initially dismissed my comment with a laugh that carried the faintest edge of condescension, testing my composure. I noted her reaction without flinching, allowing the tension to simmer beneath the surface. As we spoke, I carefully revealed insights, illustrating awareness of past manipulations, while withholding judgment, keeping the conversation strategic rather than confrontational. My thoughts raced, balancing patience against the need for assertive action, each calculation a step toward reclaiming control. The conversation turned when Callista, sensing the shifting balance, escalated with hints of legal recourse, intending to pressure me into compliance with her family-oriented demands. I listened, documenting each phrase, each subtle threat, understanding that these words were not just empty gestures, they were tools designed to manipulate, intimidate, and define boundaries without transparency. My mind methodically outlined responses, consultation with a lawyer, discreet verification of claims, and evidence collection, all conducted with deliberate caution. The anxiety bubbled briefly, a warning signal that the stakes were high, yet it was countered by a growing sense of empowerment. I had faced adversity before, this required the same strategic focus, only sharpened. As the evening deepened, I moved into action quietly, preparing my documents and organizing information that might prove crucial if the legal threats escalated. Each decision was carefully weighed, which allies to trust, what steps to take first, how to maintain integrity while asserting rights. I recalled previous encounters where subtle manipulations had gone unnoticed, resolving to prevent repetition. The house, now dimly lit, felt charged with the unspoken battle lines drawn between us. Every movement, every gesture, carried significance. I reminded myself that intelligence, foresight, and calm resilience were my greatest weapons, and that overt emotion would only compromise my position. Before retiring for the night, I paused near the window, peering out at the quiet street below. The tension in the household was palpable, but I felt an unfamiliar clarity settling within me. They believed they had me cornered, that their calculated maneuvers had forced compliance. Yet in truth, I had only begun. Each observation, every documented misstep, every carefully nurtured relationship and legal consultation were pieces of a strategy designed to restore balance and authority. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the floor, and I allowed myself a moment of quiet acknowledgement. The game had intensified, but so had my readiness. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating, and when the moment came, I would act with precision and purpose. The night settled around the house with a weight that pressed gently against the walls, the kind of quiet that made every small sound, footsteps on carpet, the soft click of a door, feel amplified. I sat at my study desk, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the papers I had been reviewing. Callista's maneuvers, subtle yet persistent, had finally left me with more than suspicion. I had tangible threads to follow, secrets embedded in old letters, overlooked memos, and digital correspondences that painted a picture of deception too precise to ignore. My pulse quickened with anticipation. The moment had come to act, but not rashly. Timing, I reminded myself, was everything. I needed calm calculation, a careful orchestration of each move. Rifling through a hidden compartment in my desk, I uncovered documents I hadn't known existed, emails confirming manipulations, contracts altered without disclosure, notes that hinted at covert alliances. Shock fluttered briefly in my chest, but I caught it, converting surprise into resolve. Every word, every signature, every carefully concealed plan I held now became a tool. I traced each detail with a steady hand, my mind mapping the implications and possible reactions. The enormity of what I had discovered was tempered by the clarity it gave me. Knowledge was leverage, and patience was power. I smiled slightly at the thought, appreciating the irony that so much had been hidden in plain sight. The subtle creak of the hallway alerted me to another presence. To my surprise, it was Jonah, my youngest cousin, usually quiet, rarely drawn into the family's power games. His eyes held a mixture of relief and determination. "I've been keeping track too," he whispered, sliding a small stack of documents onto the table. Evidence, corroboration, insight that he had collected quietly over months. In that moment, the isolation I had felt in this battle shifted, trust and alliance had found a small foothold. My chest lightened. The quiet solidarity offered not just moral support but strategic advantage. Together, we were now a force Callista hadn't anticipated, and the momentum of the evening began to tilt subtly in our favor. Armed with the combined evidence, I confronted Callista in the dimly lit living area, choosing my words like precise tools. "I've reviewed these records," I said evenly, allowing her to see the documents spread before me. "And I need you to answer honestly, how long did you plan to keep this from everyone?" Her reaction was immediate, a brief flicker of shock, a defensive tightening of lips, followed by dismissive denials. But each word she uttered, each attempt to minimize or deflect, only reinforced the weight of truth I held. I remained calm, letting the facts speak. My internal monologue measured every pause, every facial expression, noting the cracks in her composed facade. There was triumph here, not in gloating, but in witnessing the carefully constructed deceit unravel under the light of evidence. As the hour deepened, I reflected silently on the strategic position I now occupied. Callista's influence, while substantial, had limits, and with Jonah's support and the meticulously gathered documents, I had the upper hand. Yet I knew better than to assume the battle was won. The family dynamics, long skewed by favoritism and secrecy, could shift with a single misstep. Every move from this point required precision, every word measured. I allowed myself a moment to feel the quiet satisfaction of empowerment, tempered by caution. "I've finally uncovered the truth, but will it be enough to stop them?" I thought, a silent acknowledgement that while revelation was powerful, the path ahead demanded vigilance, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The turning point was here, and from it, everything would change. The estate felt unusually still as I walked through the grand hallway, each step measured, the polished floor reflecting the dim chandelier above. Evening shadows stretched long across the walls, carrying with them the weight of past manipulations and betrayals. I clutched the folder tightly, knowing it contained everything I needed: documents, emails, notes, evidence that could no longer be ignored. The anticipation gnawed at me, but I forced my breathing into a steady rhythm. Every glance from family members I passed held subtle cues, nervous shifts, and whispered murmurs that betrayed their awareness of the tension in the air. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the culmination of months of observation, patience, and strategy. Timing had to be precise, emotion could not overtake calculation. Gathering in the main hall, I presented the evidence to key family members, laying it out methodically for all to see. Shock rippled through the room as manipulated records and hidden correspondences were revealed. I watched faces pale, denials falter, and carefully constructed narratives crumble. Callista's attempt to redirect blame was immediate, her voice tight, defensive, but I remained composed, letting the facts speak louder than any protest. Each revelation reinforced my control over the situation. My quiet preparation had transformed into undeniable authority. I observed, noted, and responded with calm precision, ensuring that every point of deception was exposed without a hint of personal vitriol, maintaining moral and strategic high ground. With their reactions unfolding, I issued a final ultimatum to Callista and the remaining antagonists. You must acknowledge the truth and address your actions, or face the full consequences, I said evenly, my gaze steady, voice unwavering. Dialogue volleyed back and forth, attempts at manipulation met with measured rebuttals. I had rehearsed every possible counter, predicting emotional deflections and half-truths. Each calculated pause reinforced my control, and slowly, the room recognized that my resolve was not empty bravado. Authority, built on evidence and strategic foresight, radiated through me. This was more than confrontation, it was the assertion of independence, intelligence, and unwavering conviction. The final strategic move was executed seamlessly. Legal documents, carefully prepared in advance, were submitted, formalizing accountability and safeguarding my position. Confessions were elicited indirectly, corroborated by evidence that could no longer be contested. A weight lifted as the full scope of manipulations was neutralized, the balance of power shifting decisively. Yet, I remained mindful of the subtle currents still at play. Satisfaction was tempered by recognition of lingering fractures and the need for careful maintenance of relationships. Triumph was tempered by vigilance, awareness that the battle's conclusion did not erase the scars left in its wake. As the room emptied and the estate fell into near silence, I stood in the center, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Relief mingled with cautious contemplation, a recognition that while I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine, healing and rebuilding would take more than the evening's victories. I've reclaimed what was mine, but the scars remain, and I must decide how to heal, I thought, letting the words anchor me in the reality of both triumph and the work ahead. The confrontation had ended, but the path to restoration, clarity, and lasting respect was only beginning. Every move now carried significance, every choice would shape the family's future and my own. Morning light filtered gently through the tall windows, spilling across the quiet house where the echoes of last night's confrontation still lingered. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, observing the subtle shifts in my family's behavior. Some faces carried a tentative calm, relief masked in polite smiles, while others remained tight-lipped, simmering with lingering resentment. The weight of victory felt real, but so did the traces of old wounds, the careful reminders that trust, once broken, is fragile. I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection, acknowledging both the satisfaction of having reclaimed my authority and the sobering reality of what it had cost. The house, once a stage for manipulation and tension, now felt like neutral ground, a place where the future could be negotiated with measured patience. Legal matters were finalized with precision, confirming my position in the family estate and solidifying boundaries that had previously been murky. Callista and other antagonists had no room to maneuver, all attempts at undermining me had been documented, countered, and resolved. Friends and colleagues, aware of the events through careful disclosure, recognized not only my diligence but also the intelligence with which I had navigated months of subtle sabotage. There was a quiet acknowledgement in casual comments, a recognition that strength is measured by composure under pressure. While the tension had not vanished entirely, the certainty of my standing brought a sense of empowerment and relief, a reinforcement that calculated patience yields tangible results. I allowed myself moments of emotional closure, the tension that had been coiled for months gradually unspooling. Sitting in the garden, the evening sun casting long shadows across the grass, I felt the weight of worry lift, replaced by a grounded sense of accomplishment. Conversations with trusted allies and mentors provided both catharsis and perspective, reaffirming lessons about resilience, strategic thinking, and self-respect. The garden became a quiet sanctuary where the symbolism of growth and renewal mirrored my own journey. Even the smallest gestures, a carefully placed note, the soft hum of the wind, felt like markers of reclaimed peace, subtle signals that the past could be acknowledged without dictating the future. Looking ahead, I contemplated possibilities without fear, aware that challenges would continue to arise, yet confident in my capacity to face them. Mentorship, advocacy, and rebuilding fractured relationships hovered as open-ended potential paths. Questions lingered: would trust be rebuilt, could old wounds heal, and what new dynamics might emerge as boundaries were respected? Each consideration carried weight, but none dictated a specific outcome. I embraced the uncertainty as opportunity, a reminder that control comes not from domination but from clarity, preparation, and the ability to act deliberately when needed. Familiar symbols, the folded napkin, the documents once hidden, served as gentle anchors, echoing the lessons learned and resilience cultivated. As twilight deepened into evening, I stood by the window, gazing at the quiet streets beyond, feeling the subtle thrill of autonomy. The past, with all its betrayals and manipulations, had shaped me, but it no longer confined me. My choices, my voice, and my actions were mine to wield, each decision a statement of self-possession and strength. I have my life, my choices, my voice, now, what I do with them is entirely mine, I thought, letting the words settle, a mantra of empowerment and cautious hope. The story of confrontation and triumph had reached a resolution, yet the journey of living fully, wisely, and resiliently had only just begun. Peace was possible, tempered by awareness, fortified by experience, and guided by intelligence.